If you've known me for a while, I've no doubt that I at one point told you about my undying love for the Phantasy Star series, specifically the online sub-series. Having sort of grown up with these games, I still have many fond memories of them, and as such, I never really looked at them in a critical light. So today I'm attempting to rectify that by going through what is most likely going to be my single biggest project so far. This is going to be a two-part video series in which I cover almost every piece of media within the franchise that I can get my hands on. Sadly, some of them I simply don't have access to for a variety of reasons, so I'll just quickly get them out of the way here. The things I will not be covering are Phantasy Star Online 2, yes, due to me not being able to run it, Phantasy Star Nova, due to my Vita being broken, the game books, because they were never translated, and the CD drama, for the same reason. As well as the Phantasy Star Online 2 Episode 0 manga, as I can't for the life of me find it. Everything else is fair game. Part 1, the video you're currently watching, will be about everything up until the release of Phantasy Star Online's final episode, Episode 4, whereas Part 2 will focus on everything that came after. I will also be primarily talking about what I consider to be the definitive versions of each respective game, while occasionally making comparisons to the original release when necessitated. And as per usual, I will not be showing any footage from past the early game, unless it is necessary for the sake of the video, as even when I find games to be dogshit, I still believe things to be better when you experience them for yourself, rather than having some disembodied voice on the internet tell you what happens. With that said, let's get into it. Phantasy Star 1 is weird. It was a wild departure from the standard RPG conventions at the time. The gameplay now had you exploring the dungeons from a first-person perspective. The protagonist, Alice, wasn't just a woman, which in itself hadn't been done in an RPG up until now, but a properly defined character with a name, backstory, and clear motivation. And the same goes for her party members as well. The setting was about as far removed from dragons and magic as it gets, going right into space, and no doubt inspired by the original Star Wars, which had come out a year earlier. Gameplay-wise, it's best comparable to the original Famicom Megami Tensei game. Which is ironic, as that game came out a mere 2 months before Phantasy Star. Talk about a coincidence. For the sake of this video, I'll be playing the PS2 remake released for the Sega Ages series titled Generation 1. I'm doing this for two reasons mostly. Firstly, because I believe this to be the definitive versions of the game, improving upon many of the smaller issues of the game while still keeping the core experience intact, for better or for worse. And secondly, because the music in the original genuinely makes my head hurt. I know some people will smite me for this, but I can't stand the Sega Master System sound chip, and most Sega Mega Drive sound fonts either. I'm not saying they have to be bad, as some games make great use of them, but I digress. Let's talk about the game. As much as I want to say that this game is bad and aged like milk, I have to admit something. I kinda love it. While visually neither the original nor Generation look all that great, and the music's quality is debatable in both, I find that the gameplay still holds up quite well, as it's really quite basic. It doesn't do anything extraordinarily well, but it also doesn't really go wrong in many places. Sadly, I can't say the same about the rest of the game. To put it bluntly, it's flawed as shit. While everything leading up to the final dungeon is almost insultingly easy, entering it leads to an absolutely insane difficulty spike, and I would be lying if I said I didn't need to grind. It also retains a lot of the very maze-like dungeons from the original, almost copy-pasting them one by one, which can lead to a lot of confusion due to almost every floor and wall tile looking the exact same. They tried to mitigate this in the remake by giving you an item that functions as an auto minimap, but they make it a finite resource that depletes after 100 steps. This would be fine, but it falls apart due to another rather big issue I have with Phantasy Star: inventory management. All 4 of your party members have their own individual inventory that can only carry so many items. Again, solid in theory, as well as forcing you to manage your resources. This is a dungeon crawler after all. Too bad it handicaps you by making some important key items permanently take up space in your inventory. Not all of them, mind you, just some. Why would they do that? Your guess is as good as mine. This is the exact same problem that Golden Sun has, and... oh man, Golden Sun. Don't worry, I'll get to shitting all over that series one day, just you wait, but I digress. Yet another thing that adds insult to injury is that a lot of said key items are expensive as hell, forcing you to occasionally grind for money so that you can afford them, as well as some new equipment and health items, assuming you haven't already spent all your inventory space on hoarding minimaps. At least the remake somewhat makes up for not fixing these issues by making sure you won't get lost on what to do next anymore by adding a button that leads party members to have a little chat about what to do next, like in Phantasy Star 4, which is a lot more useful than you'd expect. Overall, I'd say it's a highly enjoyable game, especially if you like old-school JRPG dungeon crawlers, and want something fun, albeit silly. The game was really well received at the time, and some people even still think it's better than any of the NES big-name RPGs, like Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy. So naturally, it wasn't long before Sega would make a sequel. And that's how we got Phantasy Star 2, just 2 years later. Man, Phantasy Star 2 is, sure is a game. I'm gonna need to get some drinks for this one. Just like with the first game, for the sake of this video, I'll be playing the Sega Ages remake on PS2. And remember how I was saying that Phantasy Star 1 is still pretty good a few minutes ago? Well, 2 isn't. In fact, I'd say Phantasy Star 2 is a fucking atrocity! Playing both versions of the game may just have been the single most unpleasant experience I've ever had while playing an RPG. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let's dial back to the beginning for a bit. First, I'd like to start with everything I genuinely liked about the game, which, you know, it has a shit ton of cool ideas. Having the thief party member actually be able to steal items from the store is neat. You can charge your attacks by holding down the button for a bit, and the higher level attacks activate later but are substantially stronger. And you can block incoming attacks like in Mario RPGs. The setting is also generally pretty interesting. And that's it. That is all the positives. Now for the negatives. Everything else. The game looks like a fucking RPG Maker game. Not an in-house remake, and not anything professional. It looks amateurish as hell. The music is cheap as hell, both being things that Generation 1 somehow did infinitely better. I don't know how they messed it up here, but they did. The thievery is incredibly situational, the attack charges are useless, as there is no penalty for failing, and you can infinitely retry until you get the attack level that you want. And the setting is ruined by a completely underdeveloped and inconsequential story and cast. The entire game is designed around you running around towns and dungeons for hours on end, talking to the same few NPCs 1,000 times over, killing every enemy mindlessly for EXP and money, as you'll be underpowered for literally anything in the game, while you fight enemies with an encounter rate higher than any RPG I've ever played. While you now have infinite inventory space, the issue of key items clogging up inventory space still persists, as you constantly have to carry them around. The game is completely fucking aimless, even with the hint button from Generation 1 and Phantasy Star 4 returning. I beat this game with the best gear equipped and with a full party at max level, and the normal enemies were still a massive pain in the ass even in early game areas. And then there's fucking Dogfalls. This may legitimately be one of the worst fucking bosses in any video game period. He has the ability to completely take away control from your party with a status effect that can't be manually healed, so you have to pray it goes away after a few turns or else you're fucked. And he can hit your entire party with it. I'm not gonna show this here, I'm gonna make you fucking suffer. Find footage yourself, play the game if you have to. At best I'll give you fucking screenshots. And then there's the issue of your max MP. It's low as fuck, no matter how high leveled you are, meaning it'll be dry once you've cast like 3 spells. And then there's the battle performance rank and EXP share. Now after every battle you are graded on a rank like in say Devil May Cry, with S being the best. Depending on your performance you get more EXP and money. How do you get better ranks? With bullshit, that's how. Some of the prerequisites include stuff like win a single round without using magic and other dog shit. But you will want to always maximize the score anyway for 2 reasons. 1. Everything is expensive as fuck, including key items, and you're really gonna need them. 2. The EXP share. The way this works is that EXP gained per battle is evenly distributed amongst party members. So if you get say 400 XP in a battle, every party member only gets 100. It is a fucking demented system, and I would like to murder whoever came up with it. What doesn't help is that every new party member starts at level 1. Sure, they all have their benefits and you can make them stay home and level passively, or do other shit like craft items, but you're still going to be forced to grind EXP for them, so that they're anywhere near remotely viable. This remake also adds a bonus ending you can only get on a second playthrough, after loading save data from Generation 1, in which you can revive Ney. Oh wow, yeah, it's so fucking sad when Ney dies. OMG, I cry so hard. Shut the fuck up. I genuinely don't get it. Why? Why the fuck do people like Ney so much? It's not even like she does anything. In fact, she barely even classifies as a fucking character. Anyone in this game barely classifies as a character. People only like her because she's cute. Don't even get me started on the fucking dungeons. They are atrocious. If you thought the first game's mazes were bad, you have seen nothing. Here's a good example. A map with a guide on where to go. Generously provided by Phantasy Star Cave, a great resource for all things Phantasy Star. You're seeing this shit! This is atrocious! And God forbid you entered too early because you forgot to talk to every NPC in the town like 40 fucking times so that they tell you that you even need to come here to begin with. Because then you can do it all over again. Ugh! The entire game lacks substance in every fucking facet of its being. This game is a fucking insult to anything calling itself an RPG, and I am fucking tired. I love it, and I want to see every copy of it burn in a fire. If it's not obvious to you, then get a better pair of ears and eyes, because this game is abysmal. So I'd say it's time we moved on before I pop a fucking blood vessel. You know, originally I was going to make this bit a bit more interesting, but after several revisions, I've come to the conclusion that I can't. Starting from this game, I'll also be playing everything through the PS2 Complete Collection, as it is hands down the definitive edition of all these games, with improvements such as 480p, internal resolution, and even several options for difficulty and higher movement speeds. So because of this, I consider this the definitive edition of all the original games. As for 2 text adventures specifically, well, it's just several really basic text adventures that take like 30 minutes each, following the exploits of each party member in Phantasy Star 2. They're, like I said, really short and there's barely any weight to them. If you somehow, for some godforsaken reason, like the party members in PS2 and want to have some more backstory for them that mildly fleshes them out, well, here you go. I really don't have anything more to say about this game, so let's move on. Going into this game for the first time, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. All I knew was that it was by far the most divisive entry into the series, and it was developed by an entirely different team than the prior games. Having come right off of the abysmal PS2, I was prepared for literally anything. And to be fair, the game's also dogshit, but I still prefer it over 2. So let me explain why. For one, I love the idea of the generational system. The game is essentially a collection of 3 short stories. At the end of the first 2 story arcs, you get to choose who the protagonist marries, leading to different protagonists in the following arc and slightly altered story. I don't know, I just think that's a neat concept, even if really ambitious for a Mega Drive game. Actually, that's a good way to sum up the entire game. Ambitious. There's a lot of systems that don't really work because they're either underutilized or completely inconsequential. And the battle system is it's a mess. Magic has a much less important role than before, and menus are now displayed as icons that kinda don't really make sense. I'd much rather have text on a blank background. Instead of just selecting an action and expecting it to work the way you'd think it would, you now have to first select the move and then activate auto battle in order to do so, and to see a turn play out. I know the original Phantasy Star 2 did this too, and even more complicated, or rather something really similar, but that game is even worse than its remake, so I don't want to talk about it. It's a bit awkward, but you get the hang of it rather quickly. Overall, it's just kind of an underwhelming game. Also helps that the dungeons are really simple now and aren't cancerous to go through. I guess it's divisive because it sucks and wasn't made by the original team and is very grindy. But honestly, my main issue here is that it kinda misses the mark as a sci-fi RPG adventure. It feels like a very generic fantasy RPG, and I don't know, that kinda loses the charm of Phantasy Star in my opinion. But frankly, I'd much rather replay this game 10 times over than ever touching to any version ever again. And with PS3 out of the way, we finally have reached our first non-game media in the series that I'll actually be talking about. The Phantasy Star 3 character book. Technically speaking, this thing is not even official. It was just a fun little side thing by the character designer that was essentially just them having fun with the characters and putting them in dumb scenarios. The translation is, as you can see, less than great, but I still find this to be a pretty enjoyable little thing to read through. So I'd say it was a pretty good time. This game's alright, I guess. This is another text adventure spin-off, but this time it's a completely original story set shortly before the events of Phantasy Star 2. The mechanics are almost identical to those of 2 text adventure, with the key difference being that the artwork is now present for every single scene instead of just the character's face. Sadly, this comes with the same issues as before, like the combat being mostly luck-based. At least it makes up for that by actually giving you a map this time and by having save passwords. So you don't have to play it all in one sitting, even if it's really short. As with the text adventures, the PS2 remix of the first 2 games and Gaiden, which I'll get into in a bit, I'm once again playing the fan translations, which are all pretty solid. If you like old school text adventure games, then I highly recommend it, especially because it actually feels like a Phantasy Star game, unlike all the other pre-online spin-offs. And then there's Gaiden. Remember how I said that Phantasy Star 2 was the most unpleasant one to play? Well, Gaiden is straight up just the worst one. Hands down, it's a massive slog and a total grindfest. This is way harder than it has any reason to be. Sure, it's cool that there's an actual RPG spin-off in the series for once, but it's just such a chore to play that you really have no reason to ever try it out. Not to mention that it barely even classifies as a sci-fi game, being a generally really generic fantasy RPG with only very minor sci-fi elements. Which is really funny when you consider that this series became known in part due to the deviation from generic fantasy settings. This game sucks, just like the other PS games not by the main team, and it's really not worth your time. Even the fan translation sucks because, and I kid you not, the team that made it heavily changed some scenes in the translation because they didn't like them. Absolutely phenomenal. Before we move on to Phantasy Star 4 though, I'd like to talk about this little short-lived manga here called Phantasy Star C.A.R.D. It follows an amnesiac Nate-type Newman hunter by the name of Nayford and their group of amnesiac friends. It was discontinued after just 3 chapters, but what does exist is pretty good, I guess. There's sadly not a lot to talk about though, because there just isn't a lot to it. I know it technically came out not long after Phantasy Star 2 released, but I'd still like to talk about it here, because it actually laid down the foundation for the story of Phantasy Star 4. And if that's not interesting to you, then, sorry for having wasted your time. Before I get into the whys and hows, I'd first like to clarify something. I love this game. In fact, I think it's one of the best RPGs of its era. Hell, I'd put it right up there with Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy VI, maybe even higher. It's really good. Right from the start, you can see a massive shift in presentation. While the sprite work and UI are reminiscent of 2, instead of just telling you what happens, the cutscenes actually show what's going on by gradually filling the screen with stills that flesh out the individual moments of the story. The cast is incredibly likable, with everyone having a proper reason to follow along on your quest. The story and world are really cool, having the most sci-fi elements yet. The music is fantastic, the gameplay is as good as it'll ever get in a turn-based Phantasy Star game, the encounter rate isn't constantly up your ass, though still a bit high, the dungeons are solid and quite comparable to the Final Fantasies of the time, so not shit, and the NPCs and towns have their own distinct personalities and place in the world, with their own little side stories to follow as the game goes on. It all feels really alive and lived in. And for a 16-bit JRPG, that stuff is incredibly impressive. Gameplay-wise, the best improvement in my eyes is the macro system. Instead of giving you either an auto-battle system that just repeats the same thing you did the last turn, or just has everyone attack, you can instead save several turns at any time and quickly access them mid-battle. So say you saved the turn at the very beginning of the game, where you had a party member attack, a second one cast magic, and a third one cast a spell to heal, and so on and so forth. You can then just select that turn and have it all play out in any fight, and the exact same order that you selected stays, regardless of the character's speed or otherwise decided turn order. And they never override any other macros either. Sure, you may have a limited amount of them at any given time, but it's still a fantastic addition that helps fight against the same group of enemies and waste as little time as possible. I love this. It's great, and I really wish more turn-based RPGs had something like this. There's also fusion spells. You know how in Chrono Trigger when you use specific attacks in a certain order, you get way more powerful combo spells? Yeah, they took that from Phantasy Star 4, and if you liked it there, you'll still like it here. Combined with the set orders you can program into a macro, And you never have to worry about your fusion spells not coming out right. It's fantastic. And if all that wasn't enough, guess what? No grinding! At no point in time did I ever need to grind for money, or for experience points, or anything really. This game is my JRPG wet dream, and I love it. If you like 16-bit era JRPGs, or even 32-bit era RPGs, please play Phantasy Star 4. It is more than worth your time. It is an absolutely fantastic game, and my personal favorite 16-bit RPG. God, this game is good. But, as I'm sure you're no doubt aware, after PS4 the series would undergo some massive changes, as Phantasy Star 5 would shift the franchise into a direction that I'm sure no one at the time would have ever seen coming. Phantasy Star Online is kind of a personal game to me. Many people, including myself, hold it very close to their hearts, and I can't lie when I say this, but nostalgia definitely plays a part here. I usually try to be as objective as I can on this channel, and trying to find proper reasons for why a game is or is not worth playing, and that's why I started making videos to begin with, because I wanted to get people interested in the things I like. I can't do that here. Because unlike every other game I've talked about here, I have an incredibly fond connection to this one. Nothing I say here will be completely disconnected from those feelings, and I hope that's okay. One thing I'd like to clarify up front is that I'll be looking at two versions of the game here. The first is episode 1 and 2 for the GameCube, the one that I grew up with, and the second one is Blueburst, the PC port, specifically the still very active FNA fan server. It's an MMO made by people that had never played an MMO before and just wanted to make a fun multiplayer action RPG. And it is fun. I know that by just looking at it, it might look like it's really complex, especially when you know about all the legendary keyboard controllers and whatnot, but it's really quite simple. What all the buttons do is always displayed directly on screen, and the placements of the face button is already directly related to their function on the displayed screen. So it's really simple and intuitive. On top of that, there's no such thing as running around an empty world at a snail's pace, waiting to get to the next story marker and fighting some enemies along the way. Instead, you just load into the lobby, talk to some people, make a party, wait in Pioneer 2 and gear up while others join you, select a mission, play. The story is very interesting despite having very obviously been an afterthought, and every mode, even the frankly atrocious PvP mode, is really fun with friends, which is the way they were supposed to be played to begin with. And the music is still some of the best to have come out of Sega in my opinion. I actually got some of my friends to play with me for a bit and we had a great time. It's like fucking rap music. It's like the most generic Eminem bullshit. Like, this is the kind of thing you'd hear on SoundCloud. Is there anyone here? That doesn't answer my fucking question, you cocksucker.
I'm alright.
Clearly you're not. You're fucking dying.
No! What? Run for your life, little Dreamcast man! Oh, fuck off.
What was that British accent all of a sudden?
I don't know, I just randomly pronounce random words with a British accent.
Oh,
it's just how I'm built.
You fucking daft punk.
You're daft punk.
You
I want someone to insult me as a daft punk. Giant enemy spider.
Giant enemy
Does not look like a spider.
It's a giant enemy nutsack. What
the giant
fuck,
enemy
dude?
ball sack.
Why are you running so slow?
Giant enemy
No,
ball sack locked on.
It's spawning new fucking flies.
Well, of course.
What would they thinking?
Well, they were thinking of that one Reddit story where the guy had maggots crawl out of the stick. Holy shit! I'm fucking choking, God!
Okay, what the fuck? You have some diseases, man. What the fuck?
I choked on air! Holy shit!
God, fuck me laugh about
Oh
that.
my god.
How do you
breathe
choke
anymore.
on air?
I couldn't choke, I couldn't breathe anymore, holy shit. Phantasy Star 2 is killing me in real life. So, in the end, is Phantasy Star Online 1 a crappy, old, discontinued MMO with a lot of mechanics, customization and jank still worth playing? Well, I think so, as I wouldn't be here. Else, no one would be here. There's a reason why so many people, including myself, have such fond memories of it and keep coming back so many years later. I once found this video not long ago. It's a recording by David Auchenpatch, and sorry if I mispronounced that, of the last day before the official servers for the original Dreamcast version of PSO went down. And just looking at it made me feel incredibly nostalgic. I was smiling and yet kind of sad. Even people who had never played PSO before whom I'd shown this video felt kinda the same way. And the reason I believe that to be the case is the strong sense of community coming from these players who had clearly grown attached to the game, its world and its characters. Compare this to something like the recordings of the final moments before the 2010 build of Final Fantasy XIV shut down. You don't get that same feeling there. Maybe it's just me imagining everything, but to me, it means something, even if I don't quite know what. And this is why I genuinely believe that there will never be another game quite like Phantasy Star Online. Episode 3 on the other hand fucking sucks! I'm sure you remember the big card craze of the early 2000s. Everyone, and I mean everyone, was absolutely crazy about them. Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Bot and Kaito's Forgotten Kingdom, everybody wanted some of that sweet card cash. Some physically, some digitally. Sega went for the latter and thus turned the third main story episode of their action MMORPG into a GameCube exclusive standalone card game. I'll be dead honest with you. I've been playing this game on and off for several years now and I still don't quite get how the mechanics are supposed to work. Every player starts with a deck of 13 cards and everything is on a big grid. There are 5 things you can do on your turn. Summon monsters, equip weapons, move, attack the enemy and use items. All of these, except for movement, being done entirely by cards. You can also use cards during the enemy's turn to defend, and the number of moves allowed to be taken per round is determined via a dice roll. It sounds so simple, but for some reason the battles take forever. The tutorial took me 15 fucking minutes, so all the recording you're seeing right now is from that, because I'm too lazy to get any more. So I look around and see maybe I'm doing something wrong and it's like the game doesn't work or something, and then I suddenly win after half an hour. I legitimately don't understand it. This is too complex for my peanut brain. As for the story, that stuff's actually kinda cool. When starting the game, you get a choice between 2 groups to join. The first is Hero Side, a group of anti-terrorist federal agents who will spy on your private internet searches and immediately arrest you for attempting to cheat a higher social credit score. The other is ARCS, with a Z, not to be confused with ARCS from PSO2. A bioterrorist organization hellbent on destroying the government's mass production of bioweapons by using said mass-produced bioweapons to fight them. Also, there's a massive conspiracy going on, so really this is just Deus Ex in space, with cards. This is so fucking stupid, I love it. I recommend this game if you want something really dumb that may be fun if you understand it. If you do, please let me know, because my early stage dementia is ruining me. And with that, we've successfully survived the classic Phantasy Star saga. I still love this series, but there's a lot more games, shows and comics for us left to cover in this incredibly grand and varied series. And I hope I'll see you there when the time comes. But it's not going to be the next video. It'll be the one after that, because for now I'm taking a short 1 video break so I don't get burned out on this. In the meantime, if you'd like to help me get the next part of this series out faster by playing Universe, the Portable Duology or Online 2 and NGS with me, then please feel free to join my Discord server. I'd love to get more people to play with. It's always more fun to play with a full party, don't you think? Until then though, I have some other business to take care of. Cheers, and do me a favor here. Have a fantastic day.